Are you ready for a story, Mr. Moo? That's his second name. Kermit has a name called Mr. Moo. And he also knows what a kiss is. Because he gets a kiss on his head sometimes. Well, every night, actually. Because I say goodnight to him every night. Just like he was a family member. Let's watch the story, Jermey Fisher. Thanks for coming along. Let's get started. Wasn't Kermit kind of cute there? I like it when Kermit winks his eye at me. He was doing that at the end, or maybe he was winking at us. I don't know. Thank you for coming along on the journey today. I have the tale of Mr. Jermey Fisher. Again, reading from the Illustrated Treasure Classic Children's Stories by Charles Santor. #1 New York Times best-selling illustrator. I say his pictures are really cool. So let's get started. The Tale of Mr. Jermey Fisher. Once upon a time, there was a frog called Mr. Jermey Fisher. He lived in a little damp house amongst the buttercups at the edge of a pond. The water was all slippy-sloppy in the larder and in the back passage, but Mr. Jermey liked getting his feet wet. No one ever scolded him, and he never caught a cold. He was quite pleased when he looked out and saw large drops of rain splashing in the pond. "I will get some worms and go fishing and catch a dish of minnows for my dinner," said Mr. Jermey Fisher. "If I catch more than 5 fish, I will invite my friends, Mr. Alderman, Ptolemy Tortoise, and Sir Isaac Newton. Alderman, however, eats salad." Mr. Jermey put on a mackintosh and a pair of shiny galoshes. He took his rod and basket and set off with enormous hops to the place where he kept his boat. The boat was round and green, and very like the other lily leaves. It was tied to a water plant in the middle of the pond. Mr. Jermey took a reed pole and pushed the boat out into the open water. "I know a good place for minnows," said Mr. Jermey Fisher. Mr. Jermey Fisher stuck his pole into the mud and fastened his boat to it. Then he settled himself cross-legged and arranged his fishing tackle. He had the dearest little red float. His rod was a tough stalk of grass. His line was a long, fine white horsehair, and he tied a little wriggling worm at the end. The rain trickled down his back, and for nearly an hour he stared at the float. "This is getting tiresome. I think I should like some lunch," said Mr. Jermey Fisher. He punted back again amongst the water plants and took some lunch out of his basket. "I will eat a butterfly sandwich and wait until the shower is over," said Mr. Jermey Fisher. A great big water beetle came up underneath the lily leaf and tweaked the toe of one of his galoshes. Mr. Jermey crossed his legs up shorter, out of reach, and went on eating his sandwich. Once or twice something moved about with a rustle and a splash amongst the rushes at the side of the pond. "I trust that is not a rat," said Mr. Jermey Fisher. "I think I had better get away from here." Mr. Jermey Fisher shoved the boat out again a little way and dropped in the bait. There was a bite almost directly. The float gave a tremendous bobbit. A minnow, I have him by the nose," cried Mr. Jermey Fisher, jerking up his rod. But what a horrible surprise! Instead of a smooth, fat minnow, Mr. Jermey landed Jark Sharp, the stickleback covered with spines. The stickleback floundered about the boat, pricking and snapping until he was quite out of breath. Then he jumped back into the water. A shoal of other little fishes put their heads out and laughed at Mr. Jermey Fisher. And while Mr. Jermey sat discontently on the edge of his boat, sucking his sore fingers and peering down into the water, a much worse thing happened. A really frightful thing it would have been if Mr. Jermey had not been wearing a mackintosh. A great big enormous trout came up, kerflop, with a splash, and it seized Mr. Jermey with a snap. Ow! 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 And then it turned and dived down to the bottom of the pond. But the trout was so displeased with the taste of the mackintosh that in less than half a minute it spat him out again, and the only thing it swallowed was Mr. Jermey's galoshes. Mr. Jermey bounced up to the surface of the water like a cork in the bubbles out of a soda water bottle, and he swam with all his might to the edge of the pond. He scrambled out on the first bank he came to, and he hopped home across the meadow with his mackintosh in tatters. What a mercy that was not a pike, said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. I have lost my rod and basket, but it does not much matter, for I am sure I should have never dared to go fishing again. He put some bandages on his fingers, and his friends both came to dinner. He could not offer them fish, but he had something else in his larder. Sir Isaac Newton wore his black and gold waistcoat, and Mr. Alderman Ptolemy Tortoise brought a salad with him in a string bag. Instead of a nice dish of minnows, they had roasted grasshopper with ladybird sauce, which frogs consider a beautiful treat, but I think it must have been nasty. And that concludes the story of Mr. Jeremy Fisher. Tried to get the minnows, but had to run for his life as the big fish tried to catch him. They ended up with a nice meal of roasted grasshopper. That is amazing. Thank you for coming along with my journey today. And I want you all to sleep tight and don't let the bed bugs bite. Good night.